be great.
Okay, great. Oh, I'll take my headset out. So notice I'm using an air tubing headset on my cell phone. So thanks for coming tonight. And I'm hoping to just give a little bit of an introduction before I turn it over to Cece Doucette to talk about radio frequency radiation and some real important details and ways you can, mitigate problems at home and school that are practical and why the science is there. In fact, I noticed on Wikipedia yesterday that electrical sensitivity has a section and describing those that are electrically sensitive. And 10 years ago, I tried to enter something about chemical sensitivity on Wikipedia and was denied because it's not a real syndrome. So things have come far away, far, but they still deny that people who complain about electrical sensitivity, have a valid complaint. They're still very skeptical, but the resources listed in Wikipedia were good. And I thought we would enter the government lecture from NIEHS, which starts with electrical sensitivity in that list of resources. So on Wikipedia, it would be there as a good video maybe for people. So my interest is multifactorial, that I feel that environmental health encompasses so many different aspects of being well that you can't just talk about one subject like, cell phones, Wi-Fi, 5G, and smart meters and leave out why people sometimes are more aware that their cell tower is bothering them. And the cell tower could be a problem, or the cell phone could heat up in their hand, or they might get a headache from fluorescent lights when they're working all day or get tired from them because they are already environmentally sensitive and ill. They could be made ill by the installation of a cell tower, or they could be made ill because they have been working in a place or living in a place with the most often encountered exposure is mold exposure. So we see pesticide and solvent exposure as initiating environmental illness, but normal people can be sensitive to EMF, but also I really see it's the main time it comes out is when people have mold exposure, and they come to me because they're now, after being sensitized by mold and mycotoxins and overwhelmed, they're sensitive to all chemicals, all molds. EMF, like 30% of those people will be sensitive to EMF. So the way that I'm getting people interested, I think, in environmental health is to look at mental illness and addiction. So if you take the moldy high school and you put Wi-Fi in it, you've got two huge factors of the total load bringing down a person, and they can't cope, but they're children, they're kids. They don't know that they're ill. They just know that they feel better if they have a Coca-Cola or if they have a cup of coffee or they smoke cigarettes. So these vasoconstricting agents are really helping to treat the effect on the nerves of the mold and the Wi-Fi. And we think it's acting through voltage-gated calcium channels, potentially. And we think the treatment may have to do with repairing the damage to the membranes where these calcium channels are. So my big push is people who are anxious, depressed, addicted to stimulants, or eventually get adrenal insufficiency and need heroin or narcotics to get by. This is ridiculous not to look at the etiology in each individual person of what is making them unwell. So given that little synopsis of my entire life, I'll turn it over to Cece, who's the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and really go into some detail about EMF exposure and mitigation of some of the problems that we're seeing in homes and schools. Thanks.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you've done. I know that you became very ill from environmental exposures yourself many years ago and had to take a break from your medical practice while you healed. And you went and saw, I believe, Dr. Bill Ray in his Dallas clinic, who was one of the early pioneers in environmental medicine. And you were fortunate to be able to find him and to find somebody to help you heal, and then to mentor with him. and be able to take what he taught you out to your practice that you established in Martha's Vineyard. And I know we have some folks with us from the islands here. We have some who are not. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background on your medical history as well as your medical practice out on Martha's Vineyard. So, yeah.
Can I just give one fun update? Yesterday, I was honored to get a referral from, people in the government are now sending me patients. So Linda Beerbaum is really the leading toxicologist in the world, and she was the director of NIEHS, and she's sending me patients. She was on NPR a couple of days ago, and somebody called for help, and she sent them to me. So it's really an honor to go from being sick, impaired, dysfunctional emergency physician, and then being able to help people in 5 or 10 days to figure out what chemical poison them and how to fix them. It's really kind of exciting.
That's excellent, Lisa. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share, and I'll spend probably about a half an hour going through my slides, and then we will go off of my slides and open it up for questions and answers. I know Dr. Nagy is on call right now, so she may need to pop in and out, but hopefully she'll be here for some of that Q&A as well. So Carol, can you give me a nod if you can see my screen? Okay, good. Excellent. So my name is Cece, or Cecilia Doucette. That MTPW just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And I never in a million years imagined that I would be using my skill set to help people learn about wireless risks. Like most of us, we had no idea there was anything to even be concerned with wireless. And when the 21st century classroom was coming in to our schools, we didn't have budget for it. So I was helping to run our local education foundation, and I ran, 7 or 8 campaigns to bring wireless into our schools. And then a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped us off at book group one night that there is actually biological effect from being exposed to these invisible microwaves. And so I'm a tech writer, so I jumped in and looked for the peer-reviewed, published, independent, non-industry funded science. And I was just astounded to find literally thousands of studies all over the world showing extensive biological harm. And I'll walk you through the science in just a moment, but it was not an easy conversation to have with my schools, but ultimately we became the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with precautionary measures. Turn off the devices when you're not using them, turn off the wireless when you're not using it, and always use a device away from your body. So that was kind of a big deal back when that happened. And I had no idea at the time that we were the first in the nation to do even that much. And then I realized our schools weren't actually turning off the wireless, and the children and the staff were still exposed. So I worked with my senator, who is today Senate President Karen Spilka, and she put me with a lawyer in her office, and together we crafted a very simple bill that said, let's bring the right minds to the table and take a look at this issue. So we've been working on legislation in Massachusetts since 2014, and I will in a few minutes tell you more importantly about what the inroads are that we're making in New Hampshire. There's some really good work being done there. On this journey, I've had the privilege of meeting not only Dr. Nagy, but other leading medical doctors, world-leading scientists whose life work is investigating the biological effects of radio frequency radiation. That's the two-way microwave radiation that we speak about, or it's also called electromagnetic fields. So it goes by a few different names, but it's all the same thing. It's all wireless radiation for our purposes tonight. And as I was meeting a number of the experts, we started a little nonprofit out of Europe initially that would distill this big issue down to something digestible where we can quickly train a school district in about a half an hour online, or quickly train a workforce so that on your lunch hour, you could go get this training and come back and know that you don't want to be sitting under the router. You don't want to be tucking your devices into your bras and your suit pockets and your waistbands. So we do have off the shelf quick training available. I will say though that we are updating our platform right now. So we're going to be offline for a bit, but we are poised to do quick training when it's needed. And then as Lisa mentioned, I had nobody to talk to at the beginning of this journey when I fell down the rabbit hole in 2013. And how blessed am I that I've now connected with so many of the experts, as well as far too many people here in Massachusetts and across the country and the world who have been injured by wireless technology. So I started Massachusetts for Safe Technology. We meet once a month. And I will make these slides available to everybody who registered. Anything with the blue underline is something that you can drill down into. So if you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, you can join us there, and then you'll be on my distribution list. And when we have important news to announce or meetings coming up or action items you could participate in, then we'll send you a notice. And then this was really a nice surprise. And I owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. Nagy for this, because she had been a member of the Health and Buildings Roundtable forum down at the National Institutes of Health. And somehow somebody down there got a hold of my name and my work, and probably through Lisa. And they asked me if I would co-chair the technology panel for this Health and Buildings Roundtable conference. And I include this link because when we're new to this conversation, it's really hard to get our minds around it all. For this particular conference, we were limited to 10 minutes each. So there's very short, highly informative videos here. I co-chaired, and then we had Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the world's leading researchers on this, and he gives a 10-minute science talk. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, who when he retired did his deep dive and came up after speaking to a dozen of the world's leading scientists and said, we are not safe here in North America. And so he speaks from an industry perspective. We had Theodora Scorato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, which was founded by Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. And she is all over the wireless issue these days. And then we had Peter Sullivan, who heads up Clearlight Ventures, and he is a philanthropist that invests in environmental issues. And I stumbled across his work one time through a video, and he was talking about how he became terribly sick from this radiation. He was a fighter pilot, so he's up there with our gamma rays in a plane that has radar on it, which is microwave radiation, and inside the plane with all sorts of instrumentation that were likely exposing him. So he got really sick. And then as his two sons came up through the preschool years, they both wound up on the autism spectrum. And Peter did what most parents of autistic children will do, is you start looking at the diet and you clean out all the food toxins and go to a clean organic diet. And then you might do a heavy metal detox to get the heavy metals out of the body. But Peter now recommends, as the first line of defense, remove the wireless radiation exposures. And there are pediatricians and others who will recommend the same thing. Remove the wireless radiation, and as a first step, create a sleep sanctuary. And when I was watching Peter's video, he said that neither one of his sons were any longer on the autism spectrum. And that really caught my attention, because I didn't even know it was an option that you could potentially get off of the autism spectrum if you have de novo mutations, meaning that didn't come from mom, it didn't come from dad genetically, it came from somewhere in the environment. So we invited Peter to come speak at this symposium down at the National Institutes of Health too. So good, quick 10-minute videos here. And then I was so honored back in 2019, Dr. Nagy co-chaired the first US medical conference on this with Dr. Lynn Patrick, and they did it in honor of their mentor, Dr. Bill Ray out in Dallas, who had passed away. And it was one of his wishes to see a medical conference because too many people, adults and children, are being seriously misdiagnosed when these environmental factors are not considered. And most doctors and nurses and first responders have never been trained on environmental exposures. So we did the first conference out in California in 2019. And then following that, Elizabeth Kelly, or Libby Kelly, decided that she was going to put together the next one. And then the pandemic hit. So we had to pivot with that second conference in 2021 and go to an online platform, which was very expensive and time consuming to do, but we're so glad that it did work out that way. We prefer to meet in person because we get such better synergies. But the beauty of the 2021 EMF Medical Conference being online is that now any doctor, nurse, healthcare practitioner, first responder can go out and earn 24.5 continuing medical education credits. And these credits are not given lightly. There was a rigorous process to get this accredited. And then we went through the process. Libby went through it again, not only for the CMEs for doctors, but she went through it again, a separate process to get the CEs for nurses. So please share this information with your own healthcare teams. If you belong to any associations, please share this with them as well. So that's how I got involved with this. But when my schools became the first in the nation to begin taking precautionary measures, I think it happened when they read the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices. So Environmental Health Trust has a webpage called See the Fine Print, where you can go and see what's been in this legal fine print all along. But for anybody with us tonight who has an iPhone, I know right where that legal fine print is. So if you want to take out your iPhone, I'll quickly walk you through how to find this, because you're going to leave this call tonight, if this is a new conversation for you, going, wow, that was a lot of information. And then you're not going to know how to open the conversation with others to the point where they're not going to think you're just crazy. So showing people the legal fine print that's been in our devices all along is one of the most effective ways I've found to show somebody that this is a legitimate issue. So once you're in an iPhone, you go to settings, and then from settings, go down just a little ways and hit general. On an old phone, you used to have to hit about, but now you can likely go right from general to scroll all the way down on general, all the way down to the bottom, and you'll see legal and regulatory. So we used to say you could remember where to find this by remembering the acronym GAL, like this gal came on to this program with Dr. Nagy, and she showed us how to find this. So once you're in legal and regulatory, up at the top, you'll see a little list, and about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. That again is radio frequency radiation exposure, or two-way microwave radiation, that they politely call energy in this legal fine print. And what that legal fine print says is a couple of really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So you'd ought to keep it away from your body, or you're going to exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And those limits, by the way, were never biologically safety tested. And as we'll see in a few minutes, the FCC is being sued for ignoring the science. So the next paragraph in that legal fine print recommends that you use a hands-free option. They recommend speakerphone or a headset. And as Dr. Nagy noted when she first popped on, she had her headset on, which she's showing us now. It's a hollow tube or an air tube headset, and it's got that little bead on it that when you plug your device into that headset, the radiation travels up the wire. And then when it hits that little bead, that stops the radiation, but you're still getting great acoustics through the headset up to your brain. And those particular headsets have no metal because metal draws the radiation in like an antenna. So you never want to put anything with metal or radiation right up to your brain. So yeah, that legal fine print has been in there all along. And it was when our schools saw that legal fine print, they had a major uh-oh moment because they realized they have legal liability for having given all of our students and our staff a toxic device with no safety training. So that's how we became the first in the nation to have that sign in our classrooms. Now, when I was investigating this, it was really hard for me because this is invisible, right? And if the pandemics taught us anything, we need to be vigilant about invisible exposures in our environment. So I figured out that there are radio frequency radiation detection meters that people can buy. And I went to my town because we have a grant in our town. And I filled out an application because I wanted to get a meter for our schools and I wanted to get a meter for our public library. So anybody could take it out, go home and see what their exposures are, and then see what we can do about it. So I'd like to give you a demonstration on what my house looks like. So this is the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter by a company up in Canada called Safe Living Technologies. And Rob Metzinger is the founder of that company. And he's also a building biologist and an engineer. So he really knows his stuff. And this is the meter that they recommended for doctors to purchase and put into their medical practices. There's a doctor here in Massachusetts who signs it out to her patients for $10 and says you have 2 hours to go home, measure your exposures, and bring it right back. That way people don't hem and haw and, you know, delay. And she says 2 hours, bring it right back. So that's how she loans it out. But see how it's blinking green? That's as low as we can get it. Right now in my home, the maximum exposures that I'm getting are 7.25. Now, the unit of measurement, and I'm not a scientist, so this almost makes no sense to me, but the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. And in our indoor spaces, the scientific literature is indicating we want to be under 10. So I'm doing pretty good here in my house because I've simply chosen to hardwire all of our technology. And all that means is just plug things back in through an Ethernet cable. And then who knew there are little adapters you can buy to plug right into your phone. And then you can do everything on the internet you've ever done, but without the radiation once you turn off all the antennas in your devices. But I want to give you a demonstration of what happens. Here's my cell phone. I keep it in airplane mode as a rule. And I'm going to take it out of airplane mode and show you what goes on invisibly every time we use a wireless device. So one of the nice things about this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter is it allows us to hear the signals and see a scientific number of what that means. So I'm going to put my phone back in airplane mode because I really don't want to be exposed. And you see that after a couple seconds, it dropped back down to the green zone. But I want to tell you what that maximum exposure was. Remember, we want to be under 10 in our indoor spaces. That one cell phone in active mode with all those antennas transmitting, the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, the cellular, the data, the locator, the hotspot, that one phone just put me at 856,000 microwatts per square meter. And the science wants us under 10. So that's how serious this is. And I know Lisa's heart is wanting to protect all of the children in Martha's Vineyard schools because we know living on an island, there's a lot of moisture in the air, which is conducive to growing mold. And when we have radiation on top of that, we know scientifically that wireless radiation causes cells to replicate, including cells we don't want to grow quickly, like cancers and mold and a host of other cells. So It took me 3 tries. I had to resubmit my application 3 times here in Ashland to get a meter for our public library. And I had to go one by one and educate every single member of our board of selectmen and teach them in their homes. We would meet in restaurants. You know, one of them was a retired police officer, and he said, "Cece, you had me at hello." He said, "I have lost too many brethren in the police force from sitting in their patrol cars with the radar gun in the back of the car, beaming radiation right through their brains, and they die of brain tumors." I worked with a woman whose husband was a police officer, and she was telling me about the thigh cancers for holding the radar guns on their thighs while they're beaming it out at traffic. So I think that the police have taken some measures to reduce that radio frequency radiation, but you know, this is what it takes. It takes these conversations. It takes holding people's hands to understand the severity of wireless radiation. After that first medical conference in California, I met a doctor from Massachusetts there, and Dr. Judy Safrir and I came back and went after a state level grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. And she and I were able to put another one of these meters on loan in the Newton Public Library in Massachusetts. The Ashland one came out of a private grant, so only Ashland residents can take that out. But the Newton one is from state funds, so anybody with a Minuteman library card can take that one out. And now in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, they're on a different network, but they have just put one on loan in circulation in their library too. So anyone with that kind of a library card can take that one out for free. So when I did mine in 2016, the Acoustimeter was the device I chose. This one on the right is a Safe and Sound Pro 2, and that's the one that we would probably recommend today, just because they're both fine meters, but this one is calibrated and the technology is just a little bit more current. So I love my cable station, and you guys may have good cable stations too. They are one of the last bastions of independent media today. Most media is owned or heavily influenced by the wireless industry and other big corporate entities that put embargoes on what can be reported and what cannot. But our local cable stations will often give you a platform to share information. So it's a great place to do interviews on this topic. And mine was very gracious to come to my home. And I just wanted people to see what our everyday exposures are. So we walked through my home, we measured the printer, the laptop, the microwave radiation, microwave oven, and other accoutrements that most of us have in our house because we didn't know any better than to bring all this toxic technology in. So we've got a 23-minute public service announcement that anybody is welcome to use and share. And it will show you the exposures and then offer recommendations for remediation. Okay, let's look at the science. First, we'll look at the long-term effects, and then we'll talk about short-term effects. So this study over here, when Lisa talked about Dr. Linda Birnbaum being our nation's leading scientist at the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, she also oversaw the National Toxicology Program, which completed a 20-year study starting way back when they thought cell phones were fine. And they went in to test that hypothesis. And that was when 2G and 3G were the technology of the day. And at the end of the day, in 2018 and 2016, when they started compiling their results, their final report determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other findings. Now, clear evidence is the highest categorization out of 5 categories that they can assign. So that's as good as it gets. We know this causes cancer. And then the industry, whenever a good study comes out, they'll spin it. And because they own the media, they'll get their information out there and suppress the good science. But they'll say, oh, that's just one study. More science is needed. Well, right on the heels of our government completing this National Toxicology Program report, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study that corroborated everything that we found here. So we don't need more science. We need to educate the public and start taking this into our own hands, because it will take time for public policy to catch up to the science. So child and adult cancers, DNA damage, which is the roadmap to grow a proper anything from a person to a plant to an animal or a biome. And then the infertility studies are the set of studies that got me on my feet, because I started reading them. And they showed that they've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas transmitting, and it once again changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure to the radiation from a laptop. And so I was just heartsick, because our oldest daughter had just gone up to college. And of course, she brought her MacBook with her, which of course she was using on top of her reproductive organs. And then our youngest daughter at the time had just gone into high school, and we had given her a laptop, which of course she's using right on top of her reproductive organs. So that was the day that I got my shaky little knees together and decided I needed to help others understand the severity of this issue. And that was the day I found my voice and started speaking to my schools, and then eventually to my legislators. And now I speak to anybody who will listen. Neurotoxicity is a huge, huge issue. And I know that this is one that Dr. Nagy would really love to head off in the schools, especially. Before the pandemic, we were already at literally epidemic proportions of anxiety, depression, and our kids are facing suicidal ideation like we have never seen. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Hugh Taylor heads up the OBGYN department at Yale Medical. He's done some of the rodent studies, and he sees what happens when you expose the pregnant mice to radio frequency and she delivers her litter. They come out bouncing off the walls, not a care in the world, like they've got ADD, ADHD. Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Mass General, she sees huge correlations between the families in her care and what we know scientifically happens with radiation exposure. And then Dr. Martin Paul just came out with another study, a review paper this spring, that links early, very early onset Alzheimer's to radiofrequency radiation exposures. It used to be that Alzheimer's took about 25 years to show up, and then we wouldn't see it until we were senior citizens. Now we're seeing it in people in their 60s, in their 50s, in their 40s, their 30s, and even in their 20s. This is changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain. So we need to take this very seriously. And I was just brokenhearted at the medical conferences to hear the doctors saying that because we are changing the brain, we can very likely expect more and more societal outbreaks like these mass shootings and other crimes that we're seeing, because we are changing people's brains with radiation. So, and children are not just little adults, as the American Academy of Pediatrics has indicated in filings they made with the FCC way back as far as like 2012, 2013. Children are especially vulnerable because their DNA is still developing, their central nervous system is still developing, their immune system is still developing, and their skulls are thinner and their brains have a higher water content. So they are physiologically, inch per inch, absorbing more of this radiation than you and I, and it is not good for adults either. So Dr. Om Gandhi is a researcher, and he has modeled this. These heads are sideways, where the phone would be put up against this yellow dot that's the ear. When you put a cell phone up to our brain as a fully formed adult, it's going about a third of the way into the brain, literally absorbing radiation into the brain. On a 10-year-old child, that's going about 3/4 of the way into the brain. And on a 5-year-old child, look at this, it is permeating almost the entire brain. So I hope we will never give another child a device that is actively transmitting radiation. Keep everything in airplane mode, download your applications, and just use it as a dummy terminal to enjoy without the radiation. So these are the long-term effects. Some of them, there are more, but those are the highlights. Now, these short-term effects, many people recognize. Please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act and other federal programs already recognize this, along with multiple chemical sensitivities. And they call this electromagnetic sensitivities, or EMS. So you can click into that and see what our government has done to date. They're not doing enough. But I'll go through some of the more common early onset microwave sickness symptoms. Insomnia is a huge one where people just don't sleep right anymore. And time and again, after I've given one of these presentations, people will come back and say, I didn't want to know about this. And I'm like, yeah, none of us did, but better to know than to sit there, as an innocent bystander victim. But they'll say, I took a chance and I shut everything off last night. And oh my gosh, I slept for the first time in ages. So other people will tell me children's behavior issues calm back, way down. But insomnia is a huge one that you could have progress with tonight. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines that your doctors can't figure out, nosebleeds and ear bleeds. My own daughter in high school got a migraine. What teenager should be getting a migraine, right? When we stopped circling our tails at home and decided to just hardwire our home and turn off every radiating thing, her headaches and nosebleeds went way down, unless she allowed herself to get dehydrated, and then she would have them. But chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources, skin, heating, flushing, rashes, itching. We have little antennas in the surface of our skin that are really affected by this constant pulse of microwave radiation. Heartbeats that are too fast or too slow, depending on your own individual proclivities. Cognitive impairment is a big one. As we age, we do have cognitive decline, but we are seeing cognitive impairment in people of all ages today. And then these anger and behavior issues we discussed, the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So it's a lot. It's a lot to get our heads around, but it's really important that we take the time to investigate. And I tell people, don't take my word on any of this. If anything that I presented allows you to have a launch point, go do your independent investigation. And you're welcome to use my slides at the end of the day when I send them out. But Dr. Nagy had a booth at a climate program on Martha's Vineyard this weekend. And so we wanted to be sure to talk about the planetary impact. And there's a lot of research and information at this link too. But our poor pollinators are getting whammied by this radiation. And there are studies after study that show that this either outright kills them or it dysregulates the navigation systems that are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic field. And now that we've introduced this enormous layer of electrosmog, we are dysregulating their ability for the bees to find their way back to the hives, for the birds to do their proper migratory patterns. And we're really messing with their own navigation systems. Energy consumption is huge. There's a Greenpeace analyst who, as far back as 2012, indicated that if the cloud were a country, and this was 10 years ago, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. So when the industry keeps coming in and saying, 5G, more, faster, well, 5G is going to up the ante significantly on how much energy we're going to consume, because they want every device, every electronic to have a radio frequency radiation transmitter in it that's going to be consuming energy. And then all these small cell towers they want to put up all over our communities. For those who have ever tuned in to the human atrocities that happen in the Congo and elsewhere, we need to understand that there are dozens of minerals that go into our electronics, and we are perpetuating all of that without even knowing it. Once you understand this, you would never just pitch your current cell phone because there's a shinier one available on the market now. We would commit to using all of our products to the full extent of their useful lives. Data warehouses, networks, our own devices are constantly using energy, right? Streaming, we will notice if we go looking that the wireless industry and their parent companies are buying up the entertainment industry because that's their latest source of revenue. So that's a whole new revenue stream with streaming. And every time we stream, we use huge amounts of data. Best to download things through an Ethernet cable onto your device, put it in airplane mode, and then just enjoy it off of your device and not watch things while they're actively streaming. Every time we send and receive, we're using energy. And with wireless components, we're constantly having to charge them. And so that is consuming energy. And then in the background, you know, there's so many great apps to choose from, and we get all excited and put them on all our devices. And most of the time we're creatures of habit. There's very few that we actually use regularly, but all those other ones are there too, continuously doing updates and using energy in the background. So again, we have excellent resources. Dr. Cindy Russell is the founder of Physicians for Safe Technology, and she's written an excellent paper called Wireless Silent Spring. This scientist, Warnke, did something many years ago, warning us about what we're doing to birds, bees, and mankind. So all of this is available at this link. So when I fell down the rabbit hole and I'm reading all this science, I'm thinking, surely if this is as bad as what I'm finding, and I'm just me, what do I know? If this is as bad as what I'm finding, why don't we know about this? And surely somebody's got to have our backs. And then in 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came up with this report, which is free and available online, called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And I was just happily going about my way, right? I wasn't really tuned into politics. I didn't know what goes on at our federal level, but notice the graphic on here. It's a revolving door. So people coming from industry are getting appointed to our federal agencies. People from our federal agencies are leaving their offices and going to work for industry. So there are huge conflicts of interest to the point where they are no longer looking after the public. They are protecting corporate interests. So that's a really good read. And when I read that, I was like, oh, so nobody's got our backs, which is what motivated me to stand up and start trying to share this information with people who will listen and then start taking personal baby steps towards safe technology. And then it goes into most of our federal agencies. The Food and Drug Administration is the organization that told our government to do that $30 million study 20 years ago. But the person who heads up the radiation area of the FCC today is not the same person. Those guys are long since retired or passed away. The gentleman in charge today is a Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when that final report came out that determined clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage, Dr. Jeffrey Shuren turned around to the FCC and said, nah, nothing to look at here. Keep doing what you're doing. When he should have invoked public policy to protect you and I and our children and our planet. And one might ask, whatever possessed Dr. Shuren to just blow this off? Well, when we look into his background, we discover that he is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry. So once again, huge conflicts of interest. So we need to be very careful about where we get our information. And sadly, this goes all the way to the World Health Organization. They are heavily influenced by industry. So that's all the bad news. Now let's focus on what we can do and what a lot of really good people all over the country and the world are doing today. So this is what you can do in your own home. Right here, we have a router that's plugged in to the cable that comes in off the street, right? So this is where we get our technology in our home, is through these routers. And when you look on the back, there's Ethernet ports. And so all you need to do is get an Ethernet cable. We recommend a shielded cable. All that means is it's got a foil liner, because there are other harmful man-made energies that can kind of bleed out of the electric field and the magnetic field in the wiring, maybe 6 to 8 feet into your living space, that can cause some people to feel biological effects too. So upgrade just a couple extra dollars and get a shielded Ethernet cable. Run a long one up to where you use your technology. And then you can buy something called an Ethernet switch. Think of this as an extension cord for electronics. And then you just, plug these things into each other, and then get little cables, shorter cables for your devices. And who knew, like I showed a moment ago, you can buy a little $20, $30 adapter for a cell phone, and the same thing for a MacBook or a PC or a laptop, tablet, Chromebook, whatever, for short money. And then you just go into the settings and turn off all the antennas, right? You can forward your landline, or you can forward your cell phone to a landline. So if you need to make phone calls, you could do it safely here. But if you're doing anything else on the internet, you can do it safely by using a cabled connection from your router. And the nice thing is that each one of these ports gives you a much better signal and connection, so you're not competing with everybody in your house. And in a school, you can get one of these that has like 28 ports on it. So whatever you need, the technology exists. We just never knew to go look for it before. So I'll quickly go over sources of wireless radiation, and you'll have links to go in and drill down into this. So we talked about our personal devices, right? This is within our control, and we would do well to learn about this and then figure out how to turn each one off. These routers and access points on the ceilings in our schools are very toxic to the children and the staff. And our own routers, once we know, we can just call up our internet service provider and say, okay, I hardwired my stuff. How do I turn off those antennas? And when I did that, they said, oh, easy, sit down at your computer. And the tech support person just walked me through how to get into my account online. Then I just went into wireless settings, and I saw that I had a 2.4 gigahertz antenna and a 5 gigahertz antenna. And that means that a gigahertz means a billion. So for every second, that radiation is going boom, 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 a billion times a second, saying, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? To make your connections. We don't need that. We need a wire, plug it in, turn off all this radiation. So those are things that we can sometimes control ourselves. The utility smart meters, our towns got talked into the smart grid and getting rid of all these great analog meters that we had that were just mechanical devices to measure our usage of gas, water, electric, and now solar and propane. So now when you go out and you look, if there is anything on your meter that has a FCC identification number on it, that pretty much means it's transmitting radio frequency radiation. And you want to do as much as you can to protect yourself from those, or try and get to the company and see if you can opt out of that and not have it transmitting. There is no federal regulation of this, so it's state by state. But there's some shielding available that can be helpful, although we have to be careful because sometimes that radiation can hop on the wires and the pipes of your home and can cause a bigger problem, like your home is now a radio frequency antenna. So we're very fortunate that there are professionals if you're not a do-it-yourselfer. Eric Windheim, who's with us right now, yawning. Eric's heard my talk before. We do have building biology as a profession with certified consultants who can be brought in to help you assess your home's health for radio frequency radiation and other forms of man-made radiation. And there are, many of them are also certified to check for molds and VOCs and other in-building toxins. So Eric, do you want to say a word or two about being a building biologist and what you do?
Well, we're certainly glad that you're so dedicated to provide all this education. to people that are either ignorant or don't want to understand. You have a tremendous amount of patience, and you're applying a good amount of pressure, and you're getting good results. We go into homes and we detect, measure, assign a risk level, and then propose and effectuate solutions to reduce electromagnetic exposure. Mm-hmm. And today I was at a home. They had dirty electricity at 200 Stetzer meter units. I plugged in a Stetzer filter into the wall outlet, and the woman says, "Oh, I can feel that." So when you have a dirty electricity level of only 200 on the Stetzer meter, and they make an explanation that they can feel it, they are halfway to becoming hypersensitive. Mm. Then we created a sleep sanctuary, and the client was in the bedroom reading my meter. And as I turned off circuit breakers out at the main panel, she goes, "Oh my gosh, it's gone." "What?" "The buzzing feeling to my whole body, it's gone." I said, "Well, how about now?" I turned the breaker back on. "No, it's back." I turned the breaker off. "It's gone." So this person was besieged by electric fields and dirty electricity, and she definitely could feel it when you turned it off. Mm-hmm. So that's how we make people happy, help them sleep better. And it's very rewarding to see somebody literally healed right in front of your face.
Right. And so we're so grateful that the Building Biology Institute trains professionals to do this. We don't have near enough of them in the Northeast. Eric, I know you're out in California, right?
Sacramento.
Yeah. So, you know, if anybody's looking for a new career, we could certainly use good building biologists.
Oh, yeah. It's like a surfer the first surfer to catch a big wave. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a groundswell. I mean, how many doctors are there in town sending sick people back to sick houses every day? Think about that, the idiocy of that. How many plumbers? How many electricians? Yeah. You know, there might be one good building biologist every 3 or 4 or 5 states. But it's a very interesting field, very rewarding, and the market is untapped if you're looking at it from a business standpoint.
Right. So, all right. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure that people can get to the Building Biology Institute to learn more. And I know Eric and his colleagues have excellent fact sheets and resources out there as well. So we're very, very grateful for the dedication you've given to your life to help others. So
yeah, I'll put the link to the fact sheets in the chat here.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eric. And I just wanted to mention, Eric joined us, I think it was last week or the week before when we did a talk up in New Hampshire. And he had been with a family where he did the same kind of remediation. And there was a son in the back bedroom with autism. And he didn't know Eric was in the house. And he came out of the bedroom and he went, "Oh, what just happened? The pressure in my head is gone."
Absolutely correct. 22 autistic child in pajamas at 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned you had another family that you helped to remediate. And once they had a clean home environment, the child advanced several grade levels in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, we fixed the wiring, reduced the magnetic fields, filtered the dirty electricity, got rid of the Wi-Fi. And 6 months later, the mom wrote me an email and said, "The school says my child is different because he's moved up 2 grade levels in 6 months. They've never seen that before. And he can look at 2 different adults and carry on an eye-to-eye conversation rather than sitting there banging his hands on the table, looking out the window."
Yeah.
So they just saw a remarkable improvement in their autistic child.
Oh my gosh, Eric, that gives us such hope. And all the more reason why we have got to get our schools on board with this. And I'll share some resources for schools in a little bit. So utility smart meters, we may or may not have control over those. Cell towers, you know, they're bringing in more and more at closer ranges. Now we're seeing the macro antennas, the big antennas mounted right on buildings where people have no idea that's why they're getting so sick. And now the industry is looking to put small cell antennas for souped up 4G and 5G or 5th generation technology. They want to put one every 2 to 12 houses literally millions of them all over our country, so that we can have faster download speeds. And it's just ludicrous, but they're already putting them in before they're made to stop. So it's critical that we learn about this. Martin Luther King Jr. gives us hope. He said that whenever we have important changes in society, it comes through 3 channels. The public learns and gets engaged, which is what we're hoping to initiate tonight. The courts rule and eventually hold the guilty accountable, and then public policy eventually catches up. So I have a good amount of information coming forward. I'm not going to go through it all, but I want you to know it's there so that if you choose to go through my slides, you'll know where you can go to drill down into more information. Legal solutions. I mentioned that Dr. Jeffrey Shuren from the FDA told the FCC it's okay to keep radiating the public as we are. And when that determination by the FCC was made and filed in something called the Federal Register, where they officially said we're not changing our public radiation exposure limits, then that opened up the gates for lawsuits to start happening. So the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and others sued the FCC, and they presented the courts with 11,000 pages of scientific, medical, and personal experience evidence of harm that was filed in the docket with the FCC that the FCC completely ignored. And at the end of the day, the courts ruled that the FCC was, quote, arbitrary and capricious in saying these public radiation levels are fine because they had no homework to prove that their statement is true. So it's been remanded back to the FCC to prove that this public radiation exposure is fine for children, for the environment, and the rest of us. So there are all sorts of other things happening. Our friends over at Americans for Responsible Technology, they recognize that this is just going to drag it out longer at the federal level. So they have put a petition in with the Food and Drug Administration to declare an imminent hazard and start doing the scientific review that they should have done years ago, decades ago. So we're getting it from all angles. Here in Massachusetts, for those of you who live in state, we've learned recently that the Massachusetts State Level Board of Health Association has legal guidelines that now include 4 pages, the last 4 pages are about cell towers. So we're making some good inroads at the state level there. And Pittsfield in Massachusetts, there was a cell tower that went up right on top of a neighborhood at the beginning of the pandemic. It was turned on right when children and adults were confined to their homes 24/7. 20 children and adults became incredibly ill. One whose cancer had been cleared, the cancer came back. That person has now passed away. 2 others developed cancers. The children were vomiting in their beds at night. The dog was vomiting. And others were experiencing headaches, nosebleeds, ringing in the ears, pressures in the head, anxiety, depression, to the point where people had to abandon their homes. So it's been a 2-year process in Pittsfield, but their Board of Health, after investigating, said the federal law that says you can't claim any harm does not apply once a cell tower has gone up. That apparently only applies to siting a cell tower because the industry wrote the law back in 1996. So for the first time in our country, right here in Massachusetts, the Pittsfield Board of Health issued to Verizon an emergency order that said, come to the table and tell us why we shouldn't order a cease and desist. Verizon chose not to come to the table. Instead, they have gone to the federal court in Springfield, Massachusetts, and they're trying to put an injunction in to stop the Board of Health from issuing that cease and desist. The Board of Health is now asking their city council for $84,000 for legal fees to go up against the industry. So this is all happening in real time. And we've understood that the industry has billions set aside, just like Big Tobacco did, because they know the lawsuits are coming. To them, it's just business. They do not care about you or I or our children or our planet. So there are other lawsuits that have been happening. And you can look into those at your leisure. As far as public policy goes, we've had bills in Massachusetts for 8 or more years. I've had these same conversations with Representative Patrick Abrami up in New Hampshire. He had a constituent who got really sick, almost died until she figured out it was the radiation because her doctors weren't trained. They didn't know. The specialists weren't trained. They didn't know. And she had to do her own independent investigation into her symptoms before she figured it out. And then she went to her state rep, and he and she drove down from New Hampshire. We sat at my kitchen table here in Ashland, and we helped him to connect the dots further. And he wrote a bill that asked very pointed questions. Why has the insurance industry, Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, why have they put exclusions in their policies? They won't cover damages from radio frequency radiation because they know it's a leading risk. Why does that legal fine print we discussed say to keep it away from the body? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of peer-reviewed studies? And why do they keep talking about heating effects, thermal effects, when the science is showing you don't have to have heat? We've got huge impact at non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level microwave radiation exposures. And why does our country allow 100 times more public radiation than other countries? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect of all of this radiation coming at us from multiple sources day in and day out? So I was asked to go up and testify. Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada retired. He flew down and testified. Dr. Paul Heroux, who has been teaching electromagnetism at McGill up in Canada, which is like Canada's equivalent of Harvard, he drove down, and we all testified alongside citizens in New Hampshire who've been harmed, or their loved ones have been harmed, or they know what it's doing to our environment. We were able to get this bill to investigate through their House Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy. We then got it through the Senate side with Health and Human Services. And then it went under the governor's pen, and Governor Sununu signed it into law that New Hampshire had to investigate the health and environmental impacts. And so that was in 2019. It only took them 7 months, and we have had bills in Massachusetts for 8 to 10 years. And they've advanced out of committee, but they've never been enacted. So what are we doing here in Massachusetts when in 7 months we can get meaningful action there? So they spent a year, and in November of 2020, New Hampshire came out with this incredible 390-page report that documents the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry and our federal agencies. And then they make 15 recommendations. These are not ranked. These are 15 serious recommendations that we need to get on with, like getting our federal delegates to step up and fix those broken laws that allow all of this harm, and to get our schools and our libraries and our public spaces hardwired, to create safe zones where the public can access all of our public services, to start labeling everything that emits. So put a very visible sign on every pole that's transmitting radiation. Start a registry of harm, because today, where can you go if you're harmed? There's nowhere that information is being data collected. So they have this incredible report. And even though it is 390 pages, the first 17 pages contain their summary and recommendations. And then in New Hampshire, this was a 13-member commission. 10 of the commissioners agreed that we need to do something to address this issue. There were 3 that didn't. There were 2 people from industry who sat on that commission, and 1 other senator who sided with industry. And so those 3 were allowed to write a minority report. And that's starting, I think it's page 18 and goes for 10 pages. And it's the same spin and disinformation that they give to our towns, to our schools, to our municipal leaders, to our legislators, saying, oh, Wi-Fi is fine, it's great. And they've got all sorts of false information in there that is countered and the final meeting minutes at the back of the report. So you can go in and see what their playbook is and be forewarned and forearmed. So this was our nation's leading document, and it still is today. What they're doing this session now that started in January is you got to bite the elephant one bite at a time, right? So Rep. Abrami has introduced a new bill. It's House Bill 1644. It's bipartisan. And the first thing they want to tackle is let's stop the bleeding. So for any new infrastructure, you can't put it any closer than 500 meters, which comes out to 1,640 feet. And Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire, he just retired recently as the chairman of the Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering. And he worked with EMFs for 30 years and thought this was all fine until he sat on this commission and learned the truth. And so what he's done is created a 20-minute presentation that talks about why this setback is justified in the scientific literature. Within this 1,640 feet, we see statistically significant increases in death rate, as well as neurological issues and a host of other ailments. And then he provides his slides too, so anybody can drill down into the science there as well. So in January and February, we were up in New Hampshire testifying with this House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy. And there's new members, and most of them had no idea this issue even existed. They didn't even know they had this gold mine of a report, and they were going to have to report out very quickly. So they said, we need more time, and they have voted to form an interim study commission where they're actually going to study this for the remainder of this year, and they're going to get started on that this month. So if you want to see the hearings and hear what the industry says and then listen to the science, these hearings are available as well. I love New Hampshire. They're very transparent. Here in Massachusetts, we do have these bills. Senator Sears' bill, which has been around for years, would form a commission like we formed in New Hampshire. I don't hold my breath, but who knows? Every day is a new day, and hopefully they will know how to work their system enough to start at least informing the public that you should have a right to know and a right to choose safe technology. So you can look at the bills, you can listen to the testimonies that we gave this session. And the industry will come into our towns and make it sound like this is all psychosomatic and your town's the only one who's causing a fuss, when in fact, over at Americans for Responsible Technology, they have listings of more than 150 groups, organizations all across the nation that are addressing this. And you can go find groups in your area, or they've got a toolkit to teach you how to start a group if there's not one near you. But these are all towns in Massachusetts who have made significant inroads in their towns to protect their citizens. So don't let anybody tell you that you're alone or that you're the only one dealing with this. We just never hear about it because they own the media. So here's a list of a bunch of towns. Boston has filed with the FCC to say, we believe the public. We don't think these radio frequency levels are trustworthy. They banded with a bunch of other towns across the country to sue the FCC, and unfortunately they lost because we need to change that law. In Burlington, they came up with a state or a town-wide committee with members from all of their committees. And they came up with a small cell policy that had Verizon withdrawing their 7 small cell applications. And what they did is some typical things like, whatever you install in our town has to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can't put up a pole in a sidewalk where people can't get by. Anything that you put in would have to blend in with the environment to, to go along with our aesthetic codes. But then what they did is they said, you can't just come in here and drop and run like the industry is prone to doing. You can't just put this stuff in and then never come back. If we grant this application, you're going to have to come back every single year and recertify that this equipment is still operating within the law. And we as a town don't have that kind of money to do that independent recertification. So we're going to assess you, telecom vendor, a fee for every one of those small cells to be recertified annually by an independent expert. And Verizon did not want to set a precedent. So their lawyer that night said, we respectfully withdraw our application. So the industry comes in, tells your town, this is the law, there's nothing you can do. Well, that's just simply not true. Andrew Campanelli is an attorney who used to work for industry till he figured out what they're doing. He has a list of 20 things that you can do in your town bylaws to make it harder for the industry to succeed in their goal of putting this stuff up right outside your house, literally at the curb in your neighborhood. So when towns are informed by their citizens and they listen and they update their zoning codes, then the industry comes in and goes, oh, they know about this, let's move along. They want the path of least resistance. So if your town is not working on updating their zoning bylaws, you're a sitting duck. We have great tools to show you how to do that. Once Burlington did this, then other towns that we went in and helped to educate, they have updated their zoning bylaws and improved even upon Burlington. So this is doable. And there's all sorts of things that are happening all over Massachusetts. So again, all over in Easton, Connecticut, a grandmother figured out what 5G really was, and she got them to put a moratorium on until it can be proved safe. Hawaii came up with a resolution. It didn't have enough legal legs on it, but it sure raised the awareness among the populace. And then Environmental Health Trust has a whole database of actions that are happening all over the world. So for our schools, Lisa, and again, I hope these resources will be helpful to everybody in your community. We should know that the New York Times did an expose of a series of articles that showed that Silicon Valley executives are sending their children to schools with no technology, not hardwired, not wireless, but no technology, because they know that a child's brain and intelligence develops best through interactions with trusted adults, through interactions with their peers and their environment. And then they did other articles that say Silicon Valley executives are having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And yet they force that 21st century classroom campaign into all of our children's schools. So once again, our friends, Patty and Doug Wood, they have the project Americans for Responsible Technology, and they launched another project specifically for our schools called Tech Safe Schools. And they have a whole toolkit there with a letter that every parent can be giving to their schools to teach them about this. They also have a legal letter to teach the town attorneys and the school attorneys just exactly what legal risk exposure they have and how to fix it. They offer a program of remediation, just like Mr. Windheim suggested, hardwire to and through the premises and turn off the wireless radiation to protect the children in the schools and stem this chronic illness that is sweeping through all of our schools today. So excellent resources at Tech Safe Schools. I just wanted to point out this graphic up here on the top right. This was done by scientists and doctors who took professional level readings inside of a school of the radiation. And you can see the radiation spiking very, very high as opposed to if you go into a coffee shop and you sit down with your laptop, it's still not safe. But look at the difference from a coffee shop to a school building today. So that visual image should stick in our minds, and we should not relent until we have protected the children and the adults in our schools. Maryland, the state of Maryland, Department of Children and other services here, they have put out a position statement that we should be hardwiring our schools. The U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools ranked schools on their green rating. And Dr. Tony Stein worked with them, and they now have a module on low EMF best practices that cover not only the wireless radiation, but the other forms of man-made electromagnetic fields that create things like dirty electricity and how to remediate that. when we sent all of our children home to study with no safety instruction for these state issued and school issued Chromebooks and other tablets, Cyprus in the Mediterranean did the right thing. They put out fact sheets on how to do this safely if we have to be in lockdown for a pandemic. One, hardwire everything you can, and if you can't, keep at least 16 feet away from a router and put the devices in airplane mode when you're not using them. And they even go so far as to recommend by age how much time a child should be in front of a screen, and it's not a lot of time. And they also say things like do eye exercises, get your eyes away from the screen, and teach you how to do the eye gymnastics to protect your eye health. So other countries are way ahead of us, and we need to step up and make this start happening in our country. And as I mentioned, we have courses, and the Environmental Health Trust has excellent printable resources, flyers that can be hung up, postcards that can be printed up and given out in medical practices, or you can hand them to your loved ones, you can take them to your school. So we have a wealth of materials. I'm going to mute Eric because I don't think he realized his mic was still on. But as I mentioned, all of our doctors, nurses, and first responders, and all of our healthcare practitioners and our school counselors, everybody should be getting this training. And if they want to just go look at things for themselves, Physicians for Safe Technology has all the science and issues teed up beautifully there. And for our engineers, our physicists, technologists, architects, all they've been told is all Wi-Fi all the time is the best thing we can have. So this totally goes against the grain. So we have resources for them to be able to go out and look to. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer. His wife is a medical doctor. A bank of smart meters showed up on their condo. They both became very, very ill. And so now Jeremy has dedicated his life to teaching others, and he can do consultations to help walk you through just what you need to do in your own home. So there's also a page here in my personal research repository for engineers and physicists. So there will be a lot of pushback when these conversations get started until people start to look at the other side of the conversation. So what can we do for next steps? Just know there is no safe level of microwave radiation in the scientific literature. Right now, the Centers for Disease Control, when we're talking about ionizing radiation like gamma rays and X-rays in the sun, they have something called the ALARA principle, and ALARA, it stands for let's see if we can get to as low as reasonably achievable. And they've already got protocols set up for ionizing radiation. What we need to do now is take that to the next step now that we have non-ionizing or microwave radiation being used all over our world. So the three things that they recommend at the CDC is to minimize the amount of time that you would be exposed to this toxin, create as much distance from the exposure as you can, and if you need to, use shielding. And the building biologists and others at the medical conference can teach us about how to do shielding if we can't get away from it. So we need to get on this, and we need to start training our schools, our families as soon as possible, because tonight children could be sleeping in their bedrooms and getting good, high quality sleep again without sleeping with a tablet under their pillow or their cell phone or Alexa or the Ring security or doorbell thing. All of it is toxic. And the more we can take baby steps to start reducing, the sooner we will be able to have a better handle on our health. And I want to mention, some people feel great today, but this is cumulative and it is stored in our tissues. So just because you feel great today doesn't mean that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and start experiencing symptoms. So there is no safe level. Zen Honeycutt founded Moms Across America, and I think she primarily started by taking on the chemicals and the pharmaceuticals that had made so many people so ill. And now she's also taking on the wireless radiation issue. Her son, Brody, was a top student, straight A student, and all of a sudden he's getting D's and F's in his very favorite classes, and he's getting depression. And he and his mom have a great relationship. So he started talking to her about it. And she said, you know what, sweetie, go into your classroom and look around and tell me where those wireless access points are in the ceiling. And sure enough, in his favorite classes, he was sitting right under them. And he moved to the far side of the classroom and felt a little bit better, but it's still, this stuff goes out like a pebble in a pond. So it's pulsating far and wide from every device. So she just started a petition that she would like people to sign to get the parent-teacher associations to start advocating for our kids on this. But they have conflicts of interest too, because so much money has come in through the industry to get that 21st century classroom in place. So education is the crux of it. If you want to go out and sign that petition, I know that Zen would be very grateful. And here again, Dr. Linda Birnbaum from the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. This is a talk that she gave recently, an interview. And she said there are some excellent people at the federal level, but there are also captured agencies. So she sees that it's going to take local people learning about this, working it through their local level and their state level to empower the federal agencies to turn this around. And again, educate the public. This link will go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page. And to help educate the legislators and the citizens in New Hampshire, I'm doing sessions like this twice a month right now, and anybody is welcome to join. We have a limit, I think, of 100 on my Zoom license. But if we don't have it populated with people from New Hampshire, anybody's welcome to come. So you can go sign up with us at Massachusetts for Safe Technology if you're not already on my list, and we'll send you out the notices for that. I wrote EMF fact sheets with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health in 2016 that I was told would be out in 3 months, and they have never seen the light of day. So we have information written and ready for release. We would probably need to give it a quick once over and update it with some other things that have happened in the last 6 years, but we have the information. And again, we have training. So Massachusetts for Safe Technology, here's our email address. You can go out there and find us. And if you go to the contact us, it comes right to me. So feel free to reach out, and I will stop my screen share now. And, you know, as we said in the medical conference, Dr. Lynn Patrick in the first one said, when you first learn about this, it's like drinking water from a fire hose. And we get that. And we know it's a lot. And we know everybody's got a lot on their plates these days. But there's a veterinarian who just gave a talk in a pet symposium this week. And she called her talk EMF, the mother of all toxicity. And she's not wrong. So we have to make room on our plates to address this, because it's not going to get better. It's only getting worse day by day. So I'd like to open it up now. If you want to raise a hand, we'd love to hear your questions, or if you have a comment you'd like to contribute. Rob Straighten, please introduce yourself and what you've been up to.
Hi, my name is Rob Straighten. I live on Chappaquiddick. I have a cell tower about 300 feet from my house, my neighbor's front yard. I'm a patient of Dr. Nagy's and have been working with Cece for quite some time. But more specific to Martha's Vineyard and specifically to Edgartown, I'm also a member of the executive committee of the Edgartown Master Plan Steering Committee. And so Edgartown is currently working on creating a new master plan. It hasn't done so in over 30 years. And part of the reason why they were able to put this cell tower in my neighbor's front, if you haven't been to Chappie and seen the cell tower, it is literally in my neighbor's front yard, 300 feet from my house. And so I would encourage everybody on the island, particularly if you're an Edgartown resident, there's a lot of activity going on with the Master Plan Steering Committee. We will be having a public event in June at the, I think that may be at the library. I'm not sure we have necessarily nailed down the location yet, but we do meet regularly. I was on a call earlier today. I was on one Monday night. So we have regular Zoom meetings, and I myself am very concerned about this issue. I as I mentioned in the chat, I did reach out to Zoberg at TechSafe Schools. She did contact the Edgartown superintendent as well as Martha's Vineyard Regional High School superintendent. So if you have, kids in the school systems on the Vineyard, it would be very useful for parents to reach out to the superintendent and double check that they've received that information, that they hope to do something with it.
Excellent, Rob. Thank you so much for taking this on so many angles. And you're right that the parents need to connect with one another, because my hard lesson learned when we became the first in the nation to even have this sign in our classrooms was one voice is far too easy to dismiss when the industry got such a head start on disinformation campaigns. So yeah, parents definitely connect with one another and follow through with your schools. We know it's just been an incredible couple of years and everybody is just flat out with the pandemic, but this issue cannot continue to be put on the back burner because the harm is continuing every single day. So Rob, thank you so much. Did anybody else have a question or a comment? I know Dr. Nagy, you wanted to talk about your work with the Massachusetts Medical Society that we did. Oh, you're muted, hon.
I wanted to mention that the Matt DeAndrea, who's a superintendent who's leaving, came to my office, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago, and listened to a PowerPoint already on environmental health. And the superintendent came, the CEO of the hospital came, they've all changed over, but they know this stuff. And the problem is, when we try to reach out to community services or the principal of the school or the superintendent or even the CEO, I have a meeting tomorrow morning with the health council. They're interested in what they already know and doing a PowerPoint on the same issues and theories, but they're not interested in the new information. They want to push it off. So I think we have to be a little bit more forceful, because it's really hard to even get into the newspaper with advertising, or if you have an ad, they change the health and fitness directory. It doesn't exist anymore, because I was getting huge free advertising every other week. And so I just wanted to say that the Medical Society voted a resolution in December, after 12 years of my writing resolutions related to EMF, they passed one. And it's because Havana syndrome, the doctors felt, is now accepted as a real syndrome. So the doctors were doing it on their own without me. They believed that the resolution was valid. Cece helped write all the references down, and it passed through the Public Health Committee that they don't know whether cell phones, Wi-Fi, and 5G are safe at the current standards, and that reevaluation should be done. But there's no funding and there's no agency to do this reevaluation. But at least they said that they don't know. And it's the first medical society really in the country to pass this kind of thing. And something happened in California with one of my colleagues before that, and she helped us write this one. But the problem is, who do you know? How do we get the high school and the CEO of the hospital on board? So like tomorrow morning, I could talk about this. Yeah. Because I'm not really allowed to present. They want to control and keep things safe. And it's very scary for them to hear new information about hardwiring computers that kids would be having a slower heartbeat, for example, and postural tachycardia, calling it controversial, where it's POTS is not a controversial syndrome. It's a traditional medical syndrome. So that's my feeling, is that we need to push a little bit harder with who you know at the top of the food chain here.
Yeah. And I also want to mention that Mike Hugo, I first met Mike back in 2015 when Dr. Deborah Davis brought a panel of experts to Massachusetts to our State House to talk about the need for right to know legislation. And later that night, they were gracious to give of their time, all these experts who flew in, to do a community conversation too out in Framingham. And Mike Hugo was on the Board of Health in Framingham, perhaps the chair, and his wife, Beverly, was the chairwoman of the school committee. And he stood up and said, you know, Dr. Davis, you may not remember me, but you helped me when I was investigating cell towers and helped to stave off, I think, 9 cell towers in Framingham at the time. He later was on the Board of Health, where Lisa, Nagy, and I were brought in to present to the Framingham Board of Health about the risks from radio frequency radiation. So he is now working with the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards, and it was his work that got that 4-page inclusion on cell towers on their legal guidelines. And so he does work with Martha's Vineyard as well. So Rob, you may want to reach out to Mike Hugo as well, because he may be able to help strategize with you and Lisa on what to do out there in the vineyard. And it perhaps also helps that your state senator is the sponsor of the bill that would form a commission to do what New Hampshire did. So you guys have a lot going out there in Martha's Vineyard. But again, it requires an organized effort, and get as many people at the grassroots involved as you can. Even though we're all crazy busy, this has to take priority. Okay. Other questions or comments? All right, everybody. Thank you so very much for your time. I will go ahead and see if I can figure out my Zoom account and get the recording out to everybody who registered in the next day or two. Please feel free to share it far and wide. And if I can be brought in to help give presentations in other communities, whether it be with your best friends in your living room, or whether it be with your local municipal boards or your legislators, I'm happy to do these forums because we need to get word out. Okay, Rob.
Yeah, Cece, I'd be, if you want to share my email address with everybody, I would, love to hear from folks here on the island, and try to help, build that grassroots.
Okay, Rob, do you want to pop that into the chat now for those who are on, and I will save that?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your willingness to take a leadership role on this, and for running for public office, because sometimes that's what it takes. That's what Senator Denise Ricciardi did up in New Hampshire. She was on a local municipal board in the town of Bedford when they wanted to put a cell tower too close to schools and neighborhoods. And she taught herself what this issue is, and she fought and she fought and she fought, and she went all the way up to Congress, and she defeated that cell tower. And then she realized that we need important, influential people in public office. So she ran for state senator, and she is now a senator in New Hampshire. So you are an inspiration, Rob. Thanks for not taking this lying down in a casket somewhere and fighting with everything you got. All right. Okay, everybody, I wish you a safe, peaceful evening, and thank you for your time. And we hope that we will be able to continue the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Cece. Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sheila, you just raised your hand?
No, I just clapped.
Oh, that's a clap. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Thanks, Dr. Nagy.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.